we're all looking to hit the home run every time. We're in baseball and softball season right now. If you watch baseball and softball games, a lot of the success comes from hitting those singles and doubles.
Are we managing the market, or is the market managing us? Because when cattle prices are high, it's easy to get caught chasing that next move higher. But if we don't truly know our costs, are we making marketing decisions or just reacting?
Really, truly understanding what your break-evens are, what you need to achieve, what margin you're looking at.
Today, Abby Greiman with EverAg joins us for a practical conversation about break-evens, margins, putting a marketing plan in place, and managing risk in the event of a market downturn.
None of us hope that our house burns down, right? But we sleep a little better at night knowing that if it does, we have an insurance policy on it that we can fall back on and that can help us, build back up.
So are you reacting to the market or making proactive decisions instead of always trying to swing for the fences? That's ahead on this episode of the Working Ranch Radio Show. So my question is, how many of you have a proactive marketing plan set up for this year, or you just plan on doing what you've been doing the last several years? Hi, everyone. Justin Mills here, host of the Working Ranch Radio Show, and I kind of say that with a grin and a smirk on my face, knowing that my answer is not one that says that I have probably a real solid proactive plan. Not that we don't think about it and have kind of a plan in place, but to say that I'm checking all the boxes that we're going to talk about here today, I'm going to have to tell you, I may not be getting all those boxes checked. So I think you're going to find today's show good for a lot of us, no matter where you're at in your operation size or scope or even location here across the country. Hey, again, good to have you here on the program here today. Of course, meteorologist Don Day will be in later in the show, and we're going to be talking a little bit about why are some of the areas that we're expecting to have moisture in maybe April, late April and May, not seeing any of that moisture. What is the holdup in that? And he's going to tell us what's going on in our weather forecast as we look continued out for the remainder of May, June, and even a little bit into July in today's weather forecast. So make sure you stick around and tune in for that later on in the show. Also wanted to remind you to stick around too for the last segment of the program. We're going to be doing a giveaway here. We don't really do those very often. We'll be giving away a set of Working Ranch Radio Show leather coasters. And if you want to find out how you can win that set, well, be tuning into the very last segment. I'll throw out a question out there that I'm going to pose there, and whoever answers back to that, we'll throw everybody's name in a hat, draw that out, and give away a set of Working Ranch Radio Show leather coasters. Hey, if you missed something here on the program, you just have to step away from the radio at some point in time. Feel free to catch, of course, all of our programs through any podcast provider, our show site as well at workingranchradio.com, and also a shout out to a new location that you can find all of our shows, and that is by going to agriamerica.com/podcast. Yeah, a new way that you can not only catch our show, but a lot of other shows that are relevant to those of us in the ag industry. So check that new location out as well. Hey, the next issue of Working Ranch Magazine will soon be coming. For those of you that are regular subscribers, should be showing up in your mailbox here shortly. But in the meantime, if you do not have a subscription to Working Ranch Magazine, it's pretty easy. You can go to workingranchmag.com and you can get one started. Or, as I have said from time to time, you can also stop by your local Tractor Supply store. In fact, I had a listener send me an email and said that they were able to pick up one at their Tractor Supply store, and I was in mine just last weekend, went and looked on their magazine rack, and sure enough, it was on the one that I saw. So again, if you want to stop and get one, you can stop by your local Tractor Supply store. And a shout out to the Tractor Supply in American Canyon, California, in Angleton, Texas, in Ann Arbor, Michigan, and in Apache Junction, Arizona. Hey, we're going to do something a little different. We're going to take a quick break here, and when we come back, Abby Greiman with EverAg will be standing by, and we'll jump into that conversation as we talk about, are the markets managing you, or are you managing the markets with your cattle marketing and your operation? We'll be back with that after this. Managing your land takes the right tools to get the job done. And at Central UAS Technologies, they're helping ranchers explore what's possible with advanced drone solutions that are built for precision, efficiency, and real-world challenges, from targeted applications to hard-to-reach terrain. Their technology helps you reduce waste, improve coverage, and make smarter decisions across your operation. They're backed by over a decade of innovation. This isn't just a drone, folks. It's a complete aerial solution. Central UAS Technologies, versatility that saves. Learn more at centraluastechnologies.com.
Horn flies stressing your cattle? Make fly control one and done with Alticid IGR XRB. Alticid IGR XRB delivers season-long horn fly control from a single application bolus, providing up to 195 days of relief regardless of mineral consumption or location. It breaks the horn fly life cycle with no impact on beneficial insects, giving you flexible, consistent control. Learn more at cargillanimalnutrition.com/Alticid bolus.
And joining us now here on the Working Ranch Radio Show is Abby Greiman, who is the Livestock Market Advisor with EverAg. And Abby, good to have you here today on the Working Ranch Radio Show.
Yeah, happy to be here. Always glad to talk about the cattle industry.
Well, as we started our discussion earlier before we went on air here today, I kind of had made a comment that we're going to be talking about, are we as ranchers managing the market, or is it managing us? And that same terminology in my head I think about is the tail wagging the dog, or is the dog wagging the tail, kind of a conversation that we're going to have in this today. And to first start about looking at marketing calves, I think for a lot of us as producers, there's things that we do it once or twice a year. So it's not something that you just get up every day and say, hey, I'm selling a set of calves today. It's something, maybe we've done it for 10, 15 years, but at the same time, it's not something we do every day. So there are aspects of it that folks maybe just don't have a lot of confidence in.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's the biggest thing is, feeling comfortable with whatever you're doing for your operation, right? All of our operations are different. We all come from different areas, whether it be across the country or the breeds of cattle that we raise, what our target markets are, all that kind of stuff. It's all very different. Mm-hmm. And so feeling comfortable for yourself is going to look different than somebody else feeling comfortable in what they do. So it's really unique and individual, and definitely something that is really important for individual operators or groups that are operating a business to figure out and really work through.
I know you work with a lot of producers when it comes to risk management. What are you seeing? And maybe it's anecdotal type evidence that we would have or talk about a little bit today. But in terms of percentage of producers that are going into the marketing year with a plan versus those that maybe just kind of on the fly, what are you finding?
Yeah, I think that's really evolved as we've gone through this cattle cycle too, especially on the cow-calf side of things. Guys that have worked in the feedlot industry and sold fed cattle for a long time, I think are maybe a little bit more comfortable with that conversation just because, like you mentioned, they're probably doing it on a more regular basis. But as we've gotten into this cattle cycle and there's so much value in these animals that we have on our operations, both the cows and the calves that we're looking to market, there's been a lot more cow-calf operators that have been a little bit more proactive in wanting to know, how do I take advantage of where the markets are at right now, like you talked about, right? We don't want the markets leading us. We want to kind of be taking advantage of those opportunities when we get them. And so we've had a lot more interest. I don't know. It's tough to put a percentage on it because there's so many cow-calf operators out there all across the country. But we have certainly, one thing I can tell you is we have certainly had a lot more interest in it and a lot more people being proactive. And I think that's great. And something that we can capitalize on when markets are good, but even when markets aren't in historical highs every other day that we're in right now, I think it's just as important then, right? We always want to talk about profits, but sometimes limiting your losses in a market is an important part of it too. So I think it's definitely something we need to keep cow-calf operators mindful of and thinking of no matter what the situation of the market is.
Mm-hmm. You talk about where the market's at right now, and one of the things that was rolling around in the back of my head a bit was when the markets are what we are seeing now, it's pretty easy for the profitability to mask some poor management. And I think really the tone of our conversation here today is to start to get some good methods or some good skills underway so that when the market does go the other way, we're set up and we can handle it.
Absolutely. We talk about that all the time, right? Like risk management is, in this case, important to lock in these margins and these profits and all that kind of stuff. But like you said, when it's a poor marketing environment, for the producer, it's really important to have a plan then, because you can't just fly by the seat of your pants and hope that the market keeps going up and that it's going to give you an opportunity to just market and get a profit. So yes, I totally agree with that. And I think that's why using this situation when cow-calf producers are thinking about it more is a great tool to educate and then sit down at home and think about your own operation and think about how this fits into it, just like you would think about the investments that you're making in genetics or nutrition or how you're managing your forages. From my point of view, risk management is an investment, right? So you have to think about how that fits into your business plan and how you work that in to maximize the potential of your business.
When you talked about the fact that in risk management, that's something that you definitely have a lot more specialty in. And then we also bring into the conversation we had too, that a lot of times good markets can mask some poor decisions. What do you feel as you've seen different operations out there when markets are like they are now and there is some profit in the industry? Have you come across any decisions that maybe get made that seem all right in a good market, but would not be wise in a soft market? It's kind of a loaded question there, but.
Yeah, it totally is. And I think it all, as I've, thought through this topic a lot, it all comes back to one thing, and that's knowing your own operation, understanding your costs and your financials and what all of that really truly looks like, right? I think more often than not, and if we're really all being honest with ourselves about the operations that we run, we maybe don't know exactly what those costs are and really have factored all of that in. So it's understanding to the best of your ability, right? Obviously there's situations where you might have higher death loss or higher, veterinary costs in a certain year because of situations that are totally out of your control. But to the best of your ability, how good of a pulse do you have on what your costs are in your business, from where you're buying cattle at to what it costs to feed them or maintain pastures or, treat them and process them, and what your labor looks like on a year-to-year basis, and really truly understanding what your break-evens are, what you need to achieve, what margin you're looking at, maybe what investments you want to make into your business and what kind of capital that's going to require. Just really having a good financial understanding of your business and where you stand. That's the biggest struggle that I think a lot of producers have. And when they come to us to manage risk, then it becomes a question of, okay, well, what are we looking at for break evens and all that kind of stuff? And if you don't know, that makes it really difficult to put a risk management and marketing plan in place, because then you really are just kind of taking a swing and hoping you hit a home run, and maybe you don't even actually know what a home run is in the context of your operation. It goes back to what I talked about at the beginning about all of us being very individual and having very individual operations and the way we do things. What's a home run for you might not be a home run for somebody else. So understanding exactly where your operation is at and what you need to be successful and hit your goals. A lot of that in this market depends too, right? Is your goal to maintain your herd? Is your goal to take advantage of the cycle and try to grow your herd right now? Or is your goal to maybe pass it along to the next generation, right? So it's an extremely nuanced conversation, and, you have to have a really good understanding and be able to communicate that understanding to the people that you work with.
Yeah. You had a lot of good things there, Abby, that I thought was interesting as you talked about, what are your goals with the profit or with how you're utilizing the market that we're in now. And I think all of it really comes back to fundamentally having a plan. And you can't have a plan, like you said, unless you have your numbers to kind of know where we're at in this. And so we're going to get into a little bit later in the show, really specifically looking at what the operators that are handling it right, what they're doing versus the ones that aren't and how that's affecting them. But just to kind of start into that conversation, what are some of the difference that you've seen between producers who sell in a good market and then the ones who had a plan going into that?
Yeah, and I think it really goes back to exactly what you just said, is just having a plan, right? Knowing, and obviously, again, this is impacted by drought and your forage situation and all that kind of stuff, but when do I want to market these calves? How long can I hold them? Maybe if market conditions move, right? So we need to be a little bit adaptable there, or understanding, hey, I can't be adaptable based on my unique situation, and really just knowing all of that kind of stuff and going into it and then basing your plan off of all of that. Like, be very, very practical would be my very first point. Exactly what does that look like on your operation and all that kind of stuff. And then what do you want to put in place around that to support that? So then what would be your risk management strategy based off of that? Do you want to lock everything up and throw away the key and feel good about those prices? Do you want to leave something open so you can kind of adjust to a market that has had some volatility, which presents issues to a lot of producers, but we can also see those as opportunities, right? When there's something that happens in the market that moves us to a new all-time high, do you have the ability to take advantage of that if you want to? Or are you just happy with your margins where they're at and you lock those in, and that's perfectly fine too. But again, like you said, having a plan. It's really just as simple as that. Knowing what works for your operation, what works for you, what your goal is, like really defining all of that kind of stuff. So having not just a plan, but a well-defined plan, and then communicating that well to those that you work with and help you support that plan.
Okay. All right, Abby, let's take a break here. And when we come back, I want to talk a little bit more down that conversation of what you're seeing with the operators that are very well planned out. You've hit a little bit of that. I want to continue down that road some more. And then, of course, eventually we're going to get into, how do we put some action to us as producers to move forward in doing this. So we'll do that all as we come back, okay? Leverage the cattle fly and insect control solution that refuses to be average. ProZap Protectus Pour-On Insecticide IGR. Now, this isn't your average pour-on. It's a triple active solution you can count on. An insect growth regulator, adulticide, and synergist, all working together to knock down profit-robbing insects that affect cattle health and your bottom line. Ready to use as a pour-on for season-long control of lice, which means less time in the chute and more time getting things done. For fewer treatments and less handling that pays in dividends, choose Protectus. Talk to your Neogen rep or order through your distributor today. Visit prozap.com for more information. All right, Abby, we dabbled a little bit in the conversation of what operators that are being successful in handling risk management in their operations a little bit better. I want to drill down on that just maybe a little bit more, and specifically maybe down to what you're seeing as far as a time frame of the year. And I realize we got guys selling calves in different times of the year. I understand that. But at the same time, how far out are they working? Those kinds of things. What are some of the routine things to an extent that they're doing that you find is helping them to get the most out of the market?
Yeah, that's a great question. And really right now, my answer on that might change from day to day, right? Because we see the market influenced by so many things, right? A tweet from Trump can blow things up. That's kind of really what happened back in October, right? So my advice there would be, whether you do risk management on your own or you work with someone else, we talked about having a plan, understanding your costs, what your break-evens are, all that kind of stuff, when you can market those cattle or when you need to market them, depending on your unique situation. And then either expressing that to who you're working with from a risk management standpoint, or if you're executing it yourself, which some larger operators do, keeping an eye on things, right? Sometimes that's the best thing that when I work with producers that I can tell them is like, hey, what timeline are you looking at marketing your calves? What does your break even look like? Let me keep an eye on it for you. It's just as simple as that, right? Like I work in an office all day and, watch markets and am constantly taking in information and reading news stories and trying to anticipate what those moves in the market might be. So then I can give you a ring and be like, hey, we're seeing XYZ in the market right now. I think this is a great time for you to execute based on what you've got. Or I can also give you a ring and say, hey, you might see the market take a big move here. We think it's okay. Like, don't panic. We think that this market is going to turn around and give you some great opportunities because you're not marketing for a while yet. So that time of year, it's always tough to really describe that. And a lot of that can be regional too and based on basis in your area. But if you define all of that stuff, again, we go back to a well-defined plan, define all of that stuff and communicate with the people that you're working with and let them kind of bring you back that information and help you interpret it and really think about what that might do to markets at certain times. That can provide you some flexibility to take advantage of those times in the market and do your best. Obviously, very rarely are you going to hit the highs or the lows in the market as you're trying to do this thing. We always joke in the office that if we did that, we'd all be living on a private island. We wouldn't be working with producers. But we love the ag industry. We love helping producers. A lot of us come from that background and, we do our best to make the best decisions for each producer, right? And so I think that's the best way that you can really go about it.
Mm-hmm. Abby, as you were talking about that, I think what I struggle with and from a philosophical point, and I would say this is probably similar amongst other ranchers out there, is from a philosophical standpoint is, are we focusing on a margin and what that margin is, or are we focusing on trying to hit the high? And I find myself sometimes always being drawn to that, got to hit the high, and not focused about the margin. And I think that mindset of figuring out really, I mean, if you're going to try to hit the high, maybe risk management isn't your thing, but then you're also putting yourself out there. I guess your thoughts in that dilemma that I think you probably find as you talk to producers of those that understand margin and then those that always trying to chase the high.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought this up and not me, because it's a really tough conversation to have with producers, right? I mean, ideally, we'd always hit the highs, like I said, but that's just not realistic. And again, we can do everything we can to try and project this market out. But like I said earlier, one seemingly innocuous thing can totally throw a market for a loop, right? And that a lot of times you just simply can't predict that, right? So I think the margin is so important. And that's why understanding your costs and what your break evens are and all that kind of stuff is so paramount to risk management. Because if we get to a point and we feel comfortable locking in the margin, then we make that decision based off of that. And we can feel okay about it, even if the market runs up another $15, like, maybe we missed the high, but we locked in a margin that we feel really comfortable with and sets my operation or maybe my kids that I'm trying to pass this off to up for success, right? We talk about the last time we went through the cattle cycle and we swung so fast from the highs of the market down to the lows, and it put a lot of operators completely upside down, right? Had to sell businesses, had to get rid of family farms. And then you talk about the more psychological effects of not carrying on a legacy and not providing for your family and all that kind of stuff that gets much more complicated and emotional than just basic risk management and running a business. We want to be able to sleep at night, right? We're all humans at the end of the day. So looking at that margin is so important because that's what matters to your business. Mm-hmm. And that margin is going to look different for all businesses. Again, we talk about the individuality of operations, that really understanding that for you and what is success to you, that's what makes it so important. And to me, all of that goes back to margin.
Abby, I think when it comes to looking at risk management, and definitely there's more tools available for any scope and size of producer today than there was several years ago with LRPs, those kinds of things that are now available. But at the same time, I think for producers, when we start talking insurance-minded type thinking in all of that, is there's always, when the market's going good and going well, it's hard to really want to buy into that. But as I say that, I realize that's also those that, and I'm going to throw my hand up on this sometimes, that get entrapped into thinking about the hitting the highs versus the margins that we just talked about a little bit. But as we look at where our market's at now, and you've talked about it a little bit, but at the same time, doing risk management when these markets are what they are. And I realize, last fall was an example of a tweet hitting the markets and the market falling, but it still fell within a range that was highly profitable for a lot of guys. So how do we address risk management when this market's where it's at?
Yeah, that's a really loaded question. I think I mentioned the word previously, but view it as an investment into your business, right? The same way you might go out and spend a little bit more money on a bull this year than you have in the past because you're really focused on the genetics that they bring to your operation, or you're deciding to go about the way you manage your forage a different way. And a lot of that stuff does require more investment into your operation to improve things. And that's how you have to view risk management, in my opinion, right? And a lot of that comes down to really understanding the cost. You mentioned there's a lot of different tools out there. A lot of those different tools have different cost structures to them. So what are you on the hook for? When are you on the hook for that from a cash flow standpoint? We talk about cow-calf guys marketing maybe 1 or 2 times a year. So cash flow is really important to talk about and taking all of that into account when you make these decisions. But you really have to view it as an investment, just the same way that you wouldn't go buy a new building or put up a new building or buy a whole bunch of new equipment and not put some kind of insurance on that, whether that is insurance in a very literal sense or just a general sense of putting a floor underneath something. None of us hope that our house burns down, right? But we sleep a little better at night knowing that if it does, we have an insurance policy on it that we can fall back on and that can help us, build back up. I hope that producers out there continue to sell cattle for over $5 a pound for these, flyweight calves out there and all that kind of stuff. I hope that this market keeps going up, right? But if something does happen, and inevitably we know that agriculture comes with cycles, right? You can look at almost any commodity or production system and it comes with a cycle. we're not just going to keep going forever, right? So it may feel a little bit painful to invest some of that additional margin that you're making right now back into risk management, but it's going to make the pain whenever this cycle does turn a lot more manageable on the way back down, right? So ideally, we keep selling our calves for even more and this market keeps going up, and then you just invest a small portion of that into whatever risk management strategy you're utilizing. But if it doesn't, then you have that floor there under you to kind of catch you as you fall.
Yeah. All right, Abby, let's take another break. And when we come back, we're going to put a little bit more feet under, okay, what's the next step for us as producers? How do we move forward in this? And understanding this, now let's put some action behind it. So we'll do that when we come back. All right?
Sounds good.
You know, your pasture is under attack. Yeah, horn flies. They're wreaking havoc on your herd, dealing damage to your cattle's weight, and in turn, that does affect your bottom line. That's why you need a solution in your arsenal that can withstand an attack. Alticid IGR is the first and proven feed-through that is battle-tested as an effective hornfly management product, delivering the defense needed to keep your herd productive and your profit strong. Win the battle for your cattle. Learn more at alticidigr.com.
Imagine keeping your cattle exactly where you want them, while being able to tap into insights powered by a collar and an app. No Fence is the world's first virtual fencing system for grazing livestock. From the palm of your hand and delivered with GPS technology, you can set and move pasture boundaries, gain insight into grazing patterns, receive reduced animal activity alerts, and more. No wires, no posts, just empowered grazing that supports healthier land and your herd goals. 10,000 plus producers globally already trust No Fence. Explore the possibilities at nofence.com.
Abby Greiman is a livestock market advisor with EverAg, joining us here on the program. And Abby, before we start talking a little bit about next steps and how we can put some of this into practice that we've talked about, you've already talked about, really a lot of it comes back to knowing our costs, having a plan. Just that in itself is pretty good steps of how to move forward in some of this. But a quick question I was going to ask you before we get too far down that road is, if we know that the better operators out there are utilizing risk management and having those plans, those kinds of things, why don't you think other producers are doing it?
That's the $1 million question right there. I think a lot of it goes back to what we just talked about. You know, everybody wants to hit the highs and get the most. Like, we're all human at the end of the day, right? Like, we're all looking to hit the home run every time. We're in baseball and softball season right now. If you watch baseball and softball games, a lot of the success comes from hitting those singles and doubles, getting runners on base, you know, just kind of slowly moving through it and adhering to that plan and working through it. And that can be tough sometimes when you see these huge numbers on the board and cattle selling for this kind of stuff. But it goes back to the age-old parable of the turtle and the hare, right? You put a program in place, you stick to it, you implement it, you adapt as you need to, right? But you don't just go chasing after all the big shiny things. And sometimes human nature can just lead us to do that at the end of the day.
Yeah. The carrot's always hanging out there, isn't it?
It is. You can chase it for a long time if you try.
Yeah. And it's just like, was it on Winnie the Pooh or whatever like that, where the carrot's held on a string and out in front of Eeyore and just never going to catch it, but it's always out in front of you, right?
Right. Yep, exactly.
Okay. So we talked about earlier, and I had just mentioned a bit ago that, having a plan, knowing your costs so that you know what your margins are going to be, really are fundamental to a lot of this. Let's also put just some quick other next steps that you'd say for producers right now to just start to begin to implement here.
Yeah. So we talk about, I think the first step is you sit down, you figure out your goals, right? And maybe that's you and a business partner. Maybe that's you and your family. Maybe you're getting to a point where you want to transition this operation back to your kids at some point. You sit down with the people who need to be those decision makers and you get on the same page. You determine what your goals are. Okay, that's your one source of truth. That's what you always go back to. And, this gets into a much larger conversation potentially about succession planning and all that. But at the most simple level, that's where you start. And then everything you do from there always goes back to that. And if you have a question about what you're doing, you always refer back to, okay, well, does that get us closer to our goal or not? So that's step one, in my opinion. And then step two is really, cataloging all those costs, getting a good understanding of what you're putting into your operation. And then two, building off of that, what do you want to put more into your operation, right? We've talked about genetics and nutrition and all that kind of stuff, but where do you want to make improvements in your operation to support that? And I think just having a really good understanding of the direction that your operation is going, I think a lot of us might think that we know that, but have we really sat down and gotten everybody on the same page and figured that out? So that's step one. And then from there on, determining, do we have the expertise in-house to decide what we want to do for risk management, or do we need to go find somebody else that does? Put some research out there, maybe make some calls and see, if there's anybody in your area that could recommend you or anything like that. But making a decision, if we're going to work with someone, who do we want to work with? Building that relationship, helping them understand your operation, and then going from there. And that's much more difficult than I just maybe made it sound, all those steps. But that would be my advice in terms of where you start after maybe listening to this and thinking, I need to get that figured out for my operation too.
Mm-hmm. I want to reference a little bit back to this cattle cycle versus the last cattle cycle. And when I say cycle, meaning the highs in the market, and maybe even back to the cycle before that one. More tools have become readily available to producers since 20 years ago. So as you look at those tools that we have here today, and you look back on previous highs and lows in the market, what advantages do you see we have? What are the two and maybe specific tools that we have that we could really be looking at?
Yeah, I think a big one that has changed some is LRP, so livestock risk protection, which is a government subsidized insurance product that you can utilize. That has changed a lot here, even in the last 5 years, just in the way that it's available to producers and all that kind of stuff. And I think that's a great one. A lot of producers, because it's government backed, can have some questions around that, or maybe concerns there about really understanding how it works and what it does. But I think that's a great one because what it allows you to do is put a set amount of premium in place. So you know exactly what you're going to have to pay for that policy. You know exactly where your floor is at with it. And you leave all of your upside open, right? If we think about a very traditional marketing strategy or risk management strategy of just selling a futures contract on the board, you are out the money if this market keeps running, right? And like I said, we all hope that it does. And there's a lot of things in the industry that tell us that there is maybe some room to run to the upside here yet, but you're preserving all of that, right? What you sell your cattle for with LRP does not matter. What matters is all of the numbers that go into, national cash cattle prices that are used to determine what the actual ending values that policy settles to. That's what matters. You can go out and sell your cattle for a regional basis or some benefit there, or even on a value added market or grid based or anything like that could add value. That does not matter for LRP, right? So you're preserving all that upside, which in a market like this is fantastic. Another great thing about it is the fact that you don't owe that premium until you have 2 months after it settles to pay that premium, right? So you're not on the hook for margin calls. Mm-hmm. You don't have to invest anything up front on the board for that. And you can market those cattle. When we talk about cash flow, you can market those cattle, and then hopefully you've made even more money on them, and you can turn around and utilize that to pay your premium, right? When we talk about investments and cash flow and all that kind of stuff. So that's a great tool that has changed a lot. And then there's a lot of different ways that you can utilize more traditional trading practices. So options are a great thing in this market as well, because they preserve some of that upside, and you can utilize them. And there's a bazillion different strategies out there. And based on the way that we see the market moving, that strategy that we use changes from week to week sometimes. I think another thing that we overlook some is the availability of information that we have. So you can go out and you can take a lot of different stuff in that informs that decision. But yeah, there's certainly a lot of great tools out there that you can utilize that maybe we didn't have previously.
Yeah. And the one tool you did talk about, and I want to go have maybe a little bit more conversation about it, that is more available now than it was several years ago, was LRPs. I think the fact that, really doesn't matter the size or scope of operation gives that flexibility. I mean, the average cow herd in the United States is 35, 40 head, if I'm not mistaken. So that's not really the type of numbers of animals that you're going to go buy big contracts on the Chicago Merc at. So that advantage is good there. I do see that. Let's go a little bit more. While I've got you here, and I know this is kind of your wheelhouse on the LRPs from a time standpoint, especially when we see this market that is as you said, maybe even has some room to even get a little bit better than it was. From a timing standpoint, if we were going to implement that, how far out from when you traditionally market your calves would you want to be looking at an LRP?
Yeah, I think that depends on your risk tolerance. So the thing that you kind of have to try and hit the sweet spot on with LRP is the farther out you go, the more expensive it's going to be, right? Because you're ensuring you have time value in there is what we call it on the option side of things. The farther out you go, the more can change in that time. So you're paying more for that time value that you have in that LRP. Another thing is those LRP prices are based on where the futures contracts around those dates are trading. So with the market that we're running in right now, it's been inverse for a long time, right? Which means that our front months are trading at much higher values than our months that are farther out. So you're going to be spending more money to insure those cattle at a lower value the farther out you go, from the most basic generalization here. So we kind of have to figure out what the sweet spot is for that. Mm-hmm. I would say for a lot of guys, we can generalize it around that 30-week area, maybe. But a lot of that depends on what the market does too. So again, that goes back to if you're having good conversations with the people who manage your risk and that you work with, they can maybe tell you like, hey, we're maybe still a little bit far out and it's going to be a little bit more expensive, but we see X, Y, and Z potentially coming into this market. We think that it would be a good idea to lock in some protection now because you might not have an opportunity to lock in protection at this point again. Mm-hmm. So it's hard to give a definitive time cycle just because there's always things changing in the market. But that's what I would say is you kind of have to balance that time value that you have in the option as well as locking in a good opportunity there. And then it goes back to margin as well. If you have a margin target in mind and you see an opportunity out there to lock in a margin of whatever that is per head, even with the premium that you would be paying for risk management, you might as well go do it, right? Because if you feel comfortable with that and that helps you get to your goals, then that's really what matters for your operation.
Yeah. All right. Well, Abby, some good information there on that. Some good takeaways for us as producers, some practical and frankly, some easy things that we could really be doing, isn't it?
Yeah. But like I said, it's much more easier said than done. So, and I think you might be surprised at the number of producers out there that don't have a great understanding of their costs or don't, have a real defined goal in mind. But sometimes you just have to force yourself to sit down and think through that stuff, even in your busy schedule and all that kind of stuff. But I do think if you make the time and space for it, they are certainly actionable, easy items that you can take care of.
That what you just said right there. If you take the time and pull it together, there's some easy options. That's a good way to summarize all of that. All right, real quick question, one more thing, and this is totally has nothing to do with our conversation here today. But what's a book or a podcast you listen to or read that helps you from a guiding standpoint?
Oh, that's a great question. You're putting me on the spot here.
Oh, you can think. You can think. You don't have to.
I think my biggest thing when it comes to taking in information, both for me personally and for me professionally in my career, it's how many different perspectives can I get to inform what I'm thinking. So I just try to take everything in. Mm-hmm. And the great thing about the internet and all the access that we have to information these days is you can seek out just about anything you'd like to find. So I try not to let my bias get in the way. I just try to take in as many different perspectives as I possibly can and just kind of let them inform what I'm doing and combine that with my personal experiences and everything I'm seeing in my day to day. And so I don't know that I have one necessarily that I lean on. I try to take it all in and continue to be a learner and be open to other perspectives and views in every situation in life. Yeah.
Very good. All right. Ever.ag is the website. That is the company you're affiliated with. If folks want more information, that's the website. Is there anything else they need to know?
Yeah, absolutely. Feel free to reach out to me personally. My email is abby.greiman@ever.ag. So if you ever have any questions or want to chat about what that might look like for your operation, feel free to reach out directly. Like I said, we all love working with producers. That's why we do what we do in ag. So always happy to advise and give you my 2 cents.
All right. Abby, good to visit with you today. A lot of good information.
Thanks for having me on.
You bet. Abby Greiman, market advisor with EverAg, joining us here today on the program. And again, their website, if you'd like to find out more information, is ever.ag. Ag. We'll stay with us. Meteorologist Don Day is in as we take a look at that long-range weather. It's been a little bit of disappointment for some folks that were expecting some moisture. Why are we seeing a delay in some parts and continued moisture in others? We're going to talk about that coming up next.
Fascinated by our wild weather? Now you can learn, appreciate, and understand the weather in your own backyard with the new Tropo Rain Gauge. Having achieved the highest rating of any product reviewed by the WeatherStationExperts.com, the Tropo boasts rugged durability, impeccable accuracy, and precision to the 100th of an inch. Visit MeasureRain.com to order a Tropo today and use code RAINDAY. That's RAINDAY for free shipping and 10% off. Go to MeasureRain.com.
With rising feed costs and the increased focus on sustainability within the beef industry, feed efficiency is more than a buzzword. It's rapidly becoming a battle cry and an industry challenge to do more with less. By incorporating today's Limousine and Limflex genetics into your planned crossbreeding program, you can capitalize on the breed's inherent feed efficiency advantage while still banking the premiums paid for high-quality, high-yielding carcasses. That's two ways to profit instead of one. Let Limousine and Limflex deliver dollars to your bottom line. Limousine today, profit tomorrow.
Today's long-range weather brought to you by long-range epronamectin with 150 days of parasite protection in just one single dose. Help your herd keep grazing and gaining weight without extra parasite pressure. In fact, there was a study on yearlings treated with long-range. They gained 23 more pounds per head compared to those treated with generic ivermectin. Bigger gains and stronger returns on sale day. It all starts with long range. Find out more at longrangedewormer.com. Well, as we turn now and take a look at our long range weather, joining us is meteorologist Don Day. And Don, as we look ahead for us for the remainder of May and into June, a lot of things have, if we go back even in a month ago in our conversation, things have changed. We're starting to see El Nino now take a place. And in fact, as you'd said this past week, it's not quite cranking out as fast as what some people were thinking or would wanting it to happen. But at the same time, we've really seen some shifts in the weather patterns or what the models are calling for here for the next month to month and a half.
Yeah, I think the best way to describe what's going on across our side of the hemisphere, the weather's acting like an awkward teenager because don't quite know where you fit, because we're still seeing some artifacts of the winter across parts of North America. I mean, we are experiencing some very cool weather conditions across a good part of the U.S., from the Rockies east. I mean, we had some record snow events down into the Front Range of Colorado. We've had well below average temperatures across a good part of the nation, especially in the central and the Great Lakes in the Northeast, as we have a very stubborn, deep area of low pressure, very large one, that's been positioned up over Hudson Bay in eastern Canada. Now, if that sounds familiar, it's because that's how we were for most of the winter. And a lot of that has to do with some of the dynamics that we had during the winter. So here we are in May with winter hanging on in eastern Canada. At the same time, out in the Pacific Ocean, those sea surface temperature anomalies are really changing, and we're having the developing El Nino. So it's really a big contrast. And honestly, seeing an El Nino come on in spring and still seeing these winter conditions in eastern Canada is a bit of a paradox.
Well, and I think for a lot of us that have been more in the area of not getting quite the moisture, I know I've talked to different folks that are more in the eastern side of the country for the most part. I know there's some dry areas, southeastern part, but, Kansas, Missouri, and some of those places happy with the moisture they had. We were kind of thinking we'd start to see a little bit more in kind of the northern high plains, northern Rockies, and it's just kind of been a little stagnant.
Yeah, it has. And we can thank that eastern Canada deep, cold area of low pressure for that, because to start to get wet in those northern plains, northern Rockies in spring, you don't want a bunch of Canadian air coming in, because Canadian air is inherently drier. You start this time of year expecting southerly winds ahead of West Coast low pressure systems coming into the Great Basin to feed that warmer, moist air further northward. So that's why we haven't seen that moisture. Now, recently, We have seen some precipitation in the central and southern Rockies, kind of a signal that's coming. But, I would say from what we're seeing, everything is off about 3 weeks because of this Canadian cold low pressure system. Now, with the El Nino coming on and getting stronger, eventually that Canadian low has to go away just because it'll be June soon and you just can't maintain the cold up there with the longer days. But I would say that where we are now is maybe where we would be in the second week of April.
Well, and that's the concern there is just the fact that hay building, grass building for the summer. Now, if we can get some moisture later in even into June and July, you can still build some grass. But boy, that first cut and hay crop for some of these areas are going to be pretty thin.
Yeah, very thin, very, very thin. And the moisture that has come recently, unfortunately, on a geographic scale, hasn't been very large. Now, there are some encouraging signs as we get into June. As long as we see that Eastern Canada low pressure system finally work its way out, historically, when an El Nino comes on in early summer, there is a historical trend of increased precipitation in the southwest United States that then starts to grow and expand into the central high plains, into parts of the Rockies, and then parts of the Corn Belt and Midwest as we start to see that Pacific influence come in, that warmer, more moist air. And the latest seasonal models that have come out here recently are suggesting that, and they've been suggesting that here for the last several months, but they also suggested that was going to happen in May. But they also did not really anticipate that cold Canadian air settling up in Eastern Canada and just spinning around there for most of the month. So we're encouraged by what we're seeing, but at the same time, Justin, we're still kind of scratching our head on what we're seeing right now, as it's still a little bit out of whack.
So with us being that maybe around a month, give or take, behind compared to where we thought we would be at, does that push some moisture into July in these areas that are seeing dry conditions now?
That's a good question. I think that's a good question in the sense that, well, if everything is off, should we be able to catch up on that? Now, I talked about the seasonal models. The seasonal models are suggesting just that in July and August, that a large part of the central and western United States should have at or above average precipitation. The exception is the Pacific Northwest and the far northern Rockies and northern plains that sometimes in an El Nino, that is a dry signal for that part of the U.S. and Canada. But there are some hopeful signals that July and August will continue what starts in June.
Yeah. Well, we hope. If we're not getting it now, we know we needed it. We're going to need it at some point. So, all right, Don, appreciate the update. Always good. And we'll talk to you next week.
See you then.
You bet. That was meteorologist Don Day with a look at our long-range weather. If you want to tune in each and every morning to his daily video podcast, you can find the link to his YouTube channel. It's right there on his website at dayweather.com. Today's long-range weather brought to you by Long Range Apronamectin. Well, stick around. Coming back, we've got two things to do. We're going to be doing that giveaway for a set of Working Ranch Radio Show leather coasters. How do you have the opportunity to win that? Well, stick around. We'll be doing that after the break, and I'll tell you what we have in store for the next two editions of the Working Ranch Radio Show.
Capitalize on crossbreeding with Gelbvieh and Balancer bulls. Raise replacement females with added fertility, increased longevity, and greater productivity. Gelbvieh and Balancer influence females wean more pounds of calf per cow exposed. In the feed yard, Balancer influenced cattle offer increased performance, improved feed efficiency, and have excellent carcass merit. Balancers add the pounds, make the grade, and deliver the value. This year, make your crossbreeding count with Gelbvieh and Balancer genetics.
Imagine keeping your cattle exactly where you want them, while being able to tap into insights powered by a collar and an app. No Fence is the world's first virtual fencing system for grazing livestock. From the palm of your hand and delivered with GPS technology, you can set and move pasture boundaries, gain insight into grazing patterns, receive reduced animal activity alerts, and more. No wires, no posts, just empowered grazing that supports healthier land and your herd goals. 10,000 plus producers globally already trust No Fence. Explore the possibilities at nofence.com.
Well, we really don't do very much, if any, giveaways, but this week's show had a little extra time here at the back end of the show, so I thought what better way to fill it than to do a giveaway. And I don't know, for those that maybe have been longtime listeners, you know, we did this a few years ago, and the question then was, what's your favorite stock dog? Question this week, though, for this show is, what is your favorite steak and how do you like it cooked? What is your favorite steak and how do you like it cooked? And here's how you can send your responses to me. We're going to throw everybody's name in the hat. We'll draw that out. But you can send me an email at justin.workingranch@gmail.com. Again, that's justin.workingranch@gmail.com. Or you can also send a text, and that number is 307-363-COWS. Again, that phone number is 307-363-COWS. And we'll throw everybody's name in the hat again. And the question again was, what is your favorite steak and how do you like it cooked? So go ahead and do that, and we'll be drawing those names out, and I will be letting you all know. Not only will we let you know who the winner is, but we'll also tell you kind of what came in. What was everybody's response on that? So maybe there's a steak out there that you hadn't ever really tried. It's not that you hadn't heard about it, but maybe you've never really tried it, that comes in with high rave reviews and you want to give it a try. This, as things kind of get revved up for summer grilling season. Of course, a steak can be had any time of the year. You don't have to wait for the summertime to do that. Of course, we all know that as ranchers, but nevertheless, if you do want to be part of this one, again, the question was, what is your favorite steak? How do you like it cooked? My email address, justin.workingranch@gmail.com, or you can send me a text at 307-363-COWS. Hey, coming up on the next two editions of the Working Ranch Radio Show, we're going to have a topic that's going to be covered over 2 episodes. The reason for that is it's more of a panel style type show. We've got 3 guests that are going to be joining us, all from different parts of the country. Actually, 2 of the guests are kind of from the same state, but they're going to be providing us 3 different views. And the question that we're simply starting out with is, if you had $50,000 to use and to invest, how would you do that? And so that's going to be the fundamental question that we start with, and then we're going to have some dialogue and discussion back and forth in that. I anticipate the answers being relatively different to some extent between all 3 of our guests. So I think it'll be a great show. Will be very helpful, and I think will be something that's somewhat relevant for a lot of us as well, because we are seeing a lot of profit in our industry. And the thing that I think about is, how do we invest that back into our business wisely? How do we do that? And so that's kind of at the crux of this conversation, is to maybe spur that in your mind in that discussion that comes along. So be sure to tune in to the next 2 episodes of the Working Ranch Radio Show. Hey, I've had some emails here lately, partly because I've been asking for them, and that is, if you have an idea for a show topic or a guest, please send me an email on that. But I'm really looking to hear from folks that are kind of everyday ranchers and doing it out there in the countryside, that maybe they're not going to definitely put their names in the hat, but maybe you know of them and something that they have done and something that you think and the way they operate would be extremely helpful. Some principles that they have that would be very helpful to share with other folks all across the country. Send me the contact information. Let me know who that is. I would be glad to follow up with them. As I said, I've been getting a lot of show requests, and a lot of that more from companies trying to sell a product of some sort. And not that that's all bad, because from time to time we do need to look at some of the new technology or ideas that are in our industry. So we might still do those from time to time. But at the same time, I do want to hear from other producers and other guys that are out in the countryside doing things that are progressive and functional and profitable in their operations. And I think that would be helpful to share with you all as our guests as well. And you can send me those at my email address at justin.workingranch@gmail.com. And finally, just one more thing, and that is, if you're listening via a podcast provider of some source, there is a way to leave us a ratings or a review. That's very helpful. Also, if you click subscribe on that, that'll help you so that every time we drop a new show, it'll load up right there on your device, and you probably have the ability to listen to it offline. So you can do that. Again, we appreciate those ratings very much. The Working Ranch Radio Show is a production of Working Ranch Magazine, branded #1 by America's Ranchers. I'm Justin Mills, and until next time, keep your chin down and your mind in the middle.